I'm warning that Ukraine is going to attack the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in order to create a nuclear crisis that they will then use to try and get a United Nations peacekeeping force to take control of that facility, and this will bring about, a cessation on the front. Wagner was created in 2014 to do a specific task, and that was to facilitate the provision of military training, equipment, and some supervision to the ethnic Russian resistance against the Ukrainian nationalists that seized power through the Maidan revolution in February 2014. It could do that because the soil that they're operating on wasn't Russia. Russian law prohibits a private military contractor from operating on Russian soil. When these territories were annexed by Russia in September of last year, after the referendum, the Wagner group no longer had a legal basis to operate on. This was problematic. Now, they were heavily engaged in combat, and so the Russians allowed this to continue until the battle for Bakhmut was finished. But the Russian government made it clear that Wagner was going to have to comply with the law, which means that the day of this independent mercenary force was over. They would have to sign contracts, get absorbed in the Ministry of Defense, etc. Prigozhin, is one of the owners, took umbrage at this. It would lose him a money-making machine. Plus, he had elevated Wagner's status. They were superheroes in Russia. Prior to this fiasco, every major city in Russia had billboards up there advertising Wagner for recruiting. The Wagner group was held on a higher level than even the Russian army. Treated as heroes, the heroes of Bakhmut, etc. And so I think Prigozhin believed that this was the Russian government, the Ministry of Defense, was conspiring against him, and so he concocted this coup. There's every reason to believe that Prigozhin's actions were linked to specific actions of the Ukrainian government and indeed the collective West, in particular British intelligence. Well, what we do know is this, that British intelligence was briefing the Prime Minister several weeks ago about Prigozhin's planned coup. They knew about it. The CIA briefed Congress about the coup. They knew about it. The British coordinated with the Ukrainians to go into an operational pause, if you remember that happened a couple days ago, and wait until the coup started. The goal of the coup was to compel the Russians to withdraw troops from the front line, and then the Ukrainians would then go on the attack. The British had coordinated this. The British are telling Zelensky to pause, to wait. So they're acting as if there was coordination. Now, this could just be good intelligence, and Prigozhin didn't realize that he was being used in this fashion, or Prigozhin, who exhibited all the red flags that one would expect of somebody who is susceptible to being recruited: anger, narcissism, greed. He had business dealings that had collapsed in St. Petersburg. He was desperate for money. So all the things suggest that he was susceptible to recruitment. There's no proof of that yet, but we do know that the United States and Great Britain were aware of this coup and were coordinating military actions in response to this. And we also know that Prigozhin began reading from a Ukrainian script. As soon as he announced this coup, he started spouting out nonsense about the line collapsing, excessive dead, everything he could say to demoralize the Russian troops. Now he starts his adventure. I also believe that he was, again, in contact with oligarchs who are operating out of London under control of British intelligence. Whether or not Prigozhin understood what was happening, again, we don't know. I'm sure we will find out. But he was led to believe that if he initiated this march on Moscow, that Russian generals and Russian politicians would rally around his cause. So he started, and what he found is the exact opposite. Everybody rallied around Putin. And here's the important thing. Now, people talk about this negotiated settlement between Prigozhin and Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. Let's just be realistic about this. Prigozhin went into Russia with about 4,000 to 5,000 guys, not 25,000, 4,000 to 5,000. They were in convoys on major highways, which means they had a limited, predictable axis of advance. Their vehicles needed fuel, so if they began maneuvering, they would run out of fuel. Then he would be stuck with no ability to maneuver. Limited ammunition, limited food. This is a recipe for disaster if there's any resistance. And Putin had stood up. I mean, the speech Putin gave, and this is why I don't buy into the Game of Thrones stuff. Everybody talking about this master game, this clever thing. First of all, superpowers don't play Game of Thrones. Superpowers are supposed to be stable. Putin just came from the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where hundreds of billions of dollars of contracts for foreign investment in Russia were signed. These people signed those contracts because A, the Russian economy is booming, and B, they believe that Putin had created a very stable environment for investment. So why would Putin sacrifice hundreds of billions of dollars of contracts to demonstrate to the world that Russia is a banana republic? Because only banana republics have mercenary armies launch a run on the capital with an armed insurrection. This is not normal, and Putin is about normal. If you saw the anger in Putin's speech, he was furious. This wasn't a game. He was very upset about what had happened, and he had taken the gloves off. Prigozhin was confronted with the fact that there was about 2,000 Russian special forces assembling south of Moscow who were getting ready to engage the lead elements of his convoys, and 10,000 Chechen Akhmat special forces had just surrounded Rostov and were awaiting the orders to go in and clean Wagner out. Prigozhin was told, the gambit's up, nobody's rallying to your cause, you're going to die. To avoid bloodshed, we will allow you to withdraw, we won't arrest you, but you're done. You're going into permanent exile in Belarus. Wagner will be dismantled. The people who supported you, we won't prosecute, but they're not going to be able to serve. The people that didn't, and remember, the vast majority of Wagner did not support this. They were in their barracks, or they were misled into participating, thinking that they were actually securing the border from Ukrainian attack. Look, what NATO is assembling next month on the 11th for a summit. This was supposed to be their miracle. This was something that the intelligence services of the United States and Great Britain had been planning for weeks, if not months, and it fizzled, it thumped. Putin is stronger. There were no defections. The Russian army held fast on the front lines. The Ukrainians have resumed their attacks. They're being slaughtered on the front lines. NATO has no plan B. So this is a disaster for NATO. This makes Putin stronger. But again, I just want to point out that this was very embarrassing for him because it made him look like a banana republic. Look, I continue to believe that Russia will achieve a strategic victory over the Ukrainian military by the end of this summer, early fall. The Ukrainians cannot continue to sustain the casualties that they're currently suffering on the battlefield, and there's nothing in the pipeline to replace the equipment and the manpower that they're losing. But then, how Russia resolves this politically is yet to be announced. The suggestion is that Russia will destroy the Ukrainian army, seize control of the Russian territories, and then push the Ukrainian army back another 100, 150 kilometers to keep them out of range of Russian territories. But then the question is, then what? And I don't have an answer for that because the Russian government isn't showing its cards. I do believe that Russia is interested in a negotiated settlement, that they would be reasonable to an extent, meaning they're not going to give up Russian territory, they're not going to give up their security, but they're not going to demand the end of Ukraine. The strategy, the stated objective of the United States is the strategic defeat of Russia. Russia has said that if they suffer a strategic defeat, that's an existential threat to their survival, and they can use nuclear weapons in response. So our policy of seeking to defeat Russia strategically, even though we're going to fail, people need to understand
is to push Russia into a nuclear war.
Yeah, we'd be dying. That's exactly what our policy is, and it's insane. The bottom line is that the West is going to abandon Ukraine because it's unsustainable to keep with Ukraine, and then they're going to try and get the best deal they can from Putin in terms of trying to secure some sort of new European security framework. They failed all over. The effort to destroy the Russian economy through sanctions has failed. The Russian economy is stronger today than it has ever been. They failed militarily, and they're failing politically. NATO is fractured. The European Union is fractured. So I think you're going to see increasing desperation on the part of Europe to find a peaceful off-ramp off this conflict. I think the next thing on the agenda will be some sort of attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to try and create the fear of a 3 Mile Island Chernobyl type nuclear catastrophe. I'm warning that Ukraine is going to attack the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in order to create a nuclear crisis that they will then use to try and get a United Nations peacekeeping force to take control of that facility, and this will bring about a cessation on the front. Russia will never go for it. Russia's ahead of the game on this. Look, if we haven't learned one thing, Russia's smarter than Europe, and they're smarter than the United States. They're 5 steps ahead. This Prigožin thing was an embarrassment. I think it's one of the few times that Putin has gotten off on the bad foot, but they've quickly recovered. And I think Russia has a game plan. They're executing it, and the West is playing catch up, and they're running out of time. They're not going to be able to catch up.
Vanglaplaneedi portaal on tegutsenud juba üle 10 aasta ja paljastanud globaalse finants- ja võimueliidi uue maailmakorra ehitamise tegevuskava. Selle aja jooksul oleme avaldanud palju artikleid, videomaterjali, intervjuusid ja isegi filme. Juba enne COVID-skendeemiat hakkasid inimesed mõikama, kuhu poole meie tulevikku suunatakse ja kes selle kõige taga on. Vastuseks sellele käisid globalistid välja oma viiruse kaardi ja püüdsid selle abil inimesi alla suruda, kuid tulistasid endale jalga ja meie vaigistamise asemel tõusis hoopis hüppeliselt inimeste teadlikkus ning kogu maailmas hakati jõuliselt oma õiguste eest võitlema. Rahvas näitas, mis puust nad tegelikult tehtud on ning valitsustel üle maailma ei jäänud muud üle kui alla vanduda ja tunnistada, et kui rahvas nende korraldustele ei allu, siis ei jää neil muud üle kui saba jalge vahele tõmmata ja taanduda.
So from what you're saying, it sounds like this decision had just as much to do with business as it did with the science.
Well, so it really had a lot to do with what we thought people would be able to tolerate. We have seen relatively low rates of isolation for all of this pandemic. Some science has demonstrated less than a third of people are isolating when they need to. And so we really want to make sure that we had guidance in this moment where we were going to have a lot of disease that could be adhered to, that people were willing to adhere to.
Nüüd, kus inimesed on avastanud oma tõelise jõu ja potentsiaali, püüab globaalne eliit oma tegevuskava kiiremas korras ja meeleheitlikult lõpuni viia. Samal ajal teisitimõtlejaid üha tugevamini tsenseerides. Just see on tõestuseks, et info levitamine on üks efektiivsemaid relvi globalistide plaanide nurjamiseks. Kui inimestel on piisavalt infot, siis suudavad nad ka eliidile võidukalt vastu seista. Ja just seetõttu palun ma teil Vanglaplaneedi portaali tegevust toetada, et aidata globalistide kavatsused maa tasa teha. Ei ole absoluutselt vahet, kuidas te seda teete. Kas levitate seda videot või ükskõik millist Vanglaplaneedi lehematerjali. Liitute vastupanu liikumisega, et näha põnevaid intervjuusid, tellite endale midagi veepoest või teete lihtsalt rahalise annetuse. Igal juhul on sellest suur abi ning ma tänan südamest kõiki, kes on meile toeks olnud ja eestlaste vastupanu vaimu kasvule kaasa aidanud.